How about now? Is it coming through now? Or audio problems? Excellent. That's good. It only took 5 minutes before someone realized that. They were just watching my lips move and thinking, what is he saying? So I don't know. I hope you could all lip read because you're going to have to understand that yourselves. But just to give a quick synopsis of that, then I was talking about upon what type of wealth was zakat institutionalized. Zakat was institutionalized on crops, on fruit, on animals, and that's what if you were in the farming world. And if you were in the business world, then it would be on the thing that you would sell, whether that was, pots and pans, pottery, whatever it is that you made, and also any gold and silver, because people used to trade in gold and silver. So fast forward now to the 2024. Now you find that the same things really exist. Obviously, gold and silver have been replaced now. Now we have currency, sterling, pounds, or whatever currency, euros, dollar, whatever it is that we have and we deal with. And people tend not to have gold and silver, apart from maybe women have gold that they're being given as gifts. So there may be gold in that regard, but very little silver usually. And we tend not to be tradesmen and women, meaning we don't make things which we sell. Very rarely. I appreciate we have some kind of home cooks that make cakes and things like that. But generally speaking, we don't have many that we kind of tend to be a service sector society, especially here in the UK. And very few of us are involved in the farming world, especially those of us living here in the Western world. Those of our distant relatives that may be in the kind of Indo-Pac world or parts of Africa, Asia, they may still be involved in some kind of level of farming, but we tend not to be that involved in farming anymore. So really, it's going to be cash in hand, any cash that you have at home. It's going to be cash in any current account or savings account. It's going to be any long-term investment, and that could be, an ISA, that could be anything of that nature. Stocks and shares. People tend to forget pension, but pension is also included within that as well. And pretty much anything that has some kind of value in that regard, which is zakatable. The type is called al-malu nami, meaning it's wealth which has an intrinsic growth perspective. So an animal has intrinsic growth. Why? Because it can give birth to young. Fruit has intrinsic growth because every fruit has a seed which can grow more fruit. Gold and silver are intrinsically considered as mal nami. So you find these types of wealth that can be in different forms. So what a person is supposed to do, now obviously I'm just giving you a general overview. I can't go into specifics, but I've written about this extensively. You'll find it either on FiqHour QnA's website, you'll find it on the nzf.org.uk's website. You'll find it probably on videos and articles I've done on here. So numerous places you'll be able to find the more detailed work. But for now, this is just a quick overview because that's our theme for today, is just to speak about that. So the aim is that what you're supposed to do is you have a date which is considered as your nisab date. Now, your nisab date is the date in which you were already baligh and now you had some wealth that puts you above the nisab. Now, we do use silver as a nisab, even though I've written also about how gold is probably more realistic. But for now, let's stick with silver. So silver is about 300 odd pounds. So if you have that 300 odd pounds above your day-to-day expenditure, then it would be as though you've triggered nisab. So what you do is you'd make a note of that date. And you're making a note of the Islamic date. You're not making a note of the Gregorian date, because as we know, the Islamic date and the Gregorian date, there's a difference. Each year, for example, the Islamic date moves by 10 days. So that's why if you notice that you'll get Ramadan in all seasons. Why? Because it's getting shorter and shorter each time. So you'll get Ramadan now, for example, we got Ramadan in March and April. Soon it'll be in February, then it will be in January, and it'll just keep shifting along like that because of the difference that we have between the solar and the lunar calendar. So you've got to make a note of the lunar date, which is the Islamic Sharia date. Once you made a note of that, you wait then for a whole year to pass. And now you make once that date comes back up again, you then calculate all those various types. Oh, I didn't turn that down. Then you make a note of all the different types of wealth you have, the ones that I've just described to you. Once you've determined what are zakatable, because remember, shares, for example, not all of it is zakatable. Because a stock or a, I know it's not in absolute sense of the word a portion, but it is considered as a portion of the business. So if, for example, the business has got, because you don't give zakat on the infrastructure of the business. So the furniture, the photocopiers, the laptops, the PCs, you don't give zakat on that. You're only going to give zakat on the liquid assets which that company has, and any raw material, products going through the process, finished products, you give zakat on that. Okay. Now, it might be that, say, for example, you got shares in Apple, for example. Now, if you've got shares in Apple, then obviously Apple owns all its factories, it owns all its warehouses, it owns machinery, it owns equipment, it owns lots of things. So when you have a value, that whatever the market value for Apple is, so if it's got 10,000 shares and each share is worth £1,000, then I'm just giving you these silly figures, then obviously that market value is 1 million or whatever it is. But that 1 million won't be liquid assets. It could be that half of it is just building as an infrastructure. It could be that another another half of it is in this or the other. So you will only be giving zakat on that percentage which is zakatable, which will be, for instance, the liquid assets, the starting material to make Apple devices, the Apple devices which are currently going through process, and also the finished products. Now, how are you going to determine that? Well, the only way you can determine that is to go to the annual reports that every company has to do, which is on the stock market, and determine that from those annual reports. If it's not possible, then there is a proxy that you can use, and that's about 25% is the proxy, meaning whatever the value you have of those shares, you take 25%, and on that 25%, you give 2.5%. I know it's getting a little bit technical. I wanted to avoid it being technical. Wa alaikum salam. I wanted to avoid it being technical because, as I said, this is just a general overview of zakat. Not going to do any deep dive on zakat because it's going to get a little bit too technical and then a little bit challenging to follow, especially if people are new to the topic. So that's stocks and shares. Pension as well, even though some people may say, well, actually, I don't have access to my pension. I don't have control of my pension. That's even though you don't have direct control of pension, that's because you've agreed a term with the pension provider, the portfolio manager, that you don't want access to your pension till you hit 65 or 60 or whatever year you've suggested. And obviously you will decide where that money is invested. So your portfolio will be made up of all sorts. Now, obviously, we always advise people, Muslims who want to adhere to the Sharia, to make sure that their pension fund is Sharia compliant. They need to avoid gilts and bonds and things like that, which are interest-based. And they need to look at investing in, avoiding investing in haram sort of industries like alcohol and gambling and arm, in the arms world and things like that, and really invest into technology and produce and all the rest of it. But pension is also zakatable. So each year that person will have to calculate what their pension is worth and give that, again, determining how much of that pension fund is zakatable in the sense of deducting the business infrastructure, deducting this until they're left with the liquid assets, depending on what the company is, raw material, material being converted into product, and final product. Some people say, I tend to ask, oh, if I've got cryptocurrency, do I give zakat? Yes, you should give zakat. Should you be buying cryptocurrency and investing in cryptocurrency? Probably a no-no. But if you've already have, it's an asset, so you would give zakat accordingly. And anything, even if people say, well, I've got pieces of art. Do I give zakat on pieces of art? Well, if it's bought for trade, then it's a trade item. If it's bought because you want to stick it into your passage, and even though it's worth 1 million, for example, but you just want to have it in your front room and you're not going to sell it, then there's no zakat due. There has to be an intention at the time of purchase to sell in order for it to be an item of trade. If there's no intention at the time of purchase to sell, then it's not an item of trade, and therefore there is no zakat due upon it. Similarly, like if a person has diamonds and rubies and whatever else, these fine stones and gems, then again, if this person bought it just because he's going to give it as a gift to his wife, there's no zakat due upon it. But if he bought it and had the intention that this was for trade purposes, then there is zakat due upon it. So similarly, if a person buys a car, if he buys a car and he's going to keep that car and he's going to use that car and he's going to drive around in that car, so he might have like a bit of a rough and ready runaround car that he has, but then he might have quite a decent car which he uses for big business meetings and family events and weddings and things like that. So when he buys that car, even though that car might be worth 100 grand, he buys that car, but he has a niyyah not to sell it, but his niyyah is to keep it in order to drive around for these purposes. Then there's no zakat due upon it. If, however, he buys a car with the intention to sell, then there's zakat due upon it because now it's an item of trade. So the intention at the time of purchase is crucial. Similarly, if he takes into his possession things like inheritance, so his father dies and he takes into his possession lots of land, and he's not sure what he's going to do with this land. He might sell it, he might keep it, he's not sure. Then there's no zakat due upon that because he didn't purchase it, it was given to him. However, if it's money, then that will be added to the total. Why? Because gold and silver, which the modern day equivalent is money, is zakatable because of its inherent wealth, its inherent properties. So that's the only distinction to be made there. So any zakat related questions, please fire away. Whilst we're waiting for some zakat related questions, I know that I've not picked up a lot of questions which have come through the Markaz al-Ifta wal Qadha, so I'll pick them up now, inshallah. I think it was a gents group. Is shaking hands with your wife's mother and grandmother invalidate one's wudu according to the Hanafi Mazhab? No, not sure where that's come from. There is nothing at all. As has been mentioned previously, when it comes to nullifying wudu, it is what the fuqaha say, ma kharaja min as-sabilain, meaning that which exits from the two orifices. By that, nothing else will, touching is not a means of invalidating one's wudu. There was a question which I can't find now. The poor guy didn't answer. There you go. Question: is bovine serum albumin halal when present in health supplements? You would have to see as to what the source of that is. If the source, because obviously it can come from vegetable sources or vegetarian sources, it can also come from meat animal sources. So you have to determine what the source is. So if you're looking at health supplements, then you need to seek out the vegetarian or vegan sign. If you see the vegetarian or vegan sign, then even though it has bovine serum albumin in it, it won't be a problem because that will be a vegetable source. But if you do not find the vegetarian or vegetable vegan mark on there, then there's a good chance, obviously, that this is coming from an animal source, and most likely it is not going to be halal because the halal industry, relatively speaking, especially in the health supplement area, is not going to be halal unless, obviously, there is a body that is certifying it as halal. If there isn't a body that's certifying as halal, then obviously there won't be that availability. What's the ruling on attending a funeral of a non-Muslim? So when it comes to attending funerals, then there's no harm in attending a funeral when it is a social event. If there is any religious practices that are taking place, then obviously one is not permitted to attend. Why? Because when it comes to religious practices, there has to be a clear definition between, say, Judaism and Islam, or between Christianity and Islam. There has to be a clear definition, and one cannot partake in religious services that belong to another faith. those have been absolutely forbidden for Muslims to engage in. So if ever it comes to a situation where this is just a social event, you're just going to go pop by to that person's house who's lost their father or lost their mother, and you're going to give them your condolences because they're a neighbor, they're a work colleague, they're somebody that you know, a friend, then there's nothing wrong with that. If, however, you have to partake in certain religious rituals, or you're present as religious, excuse me, as religious rituals are taking place in front of you, then that is problematic. Therefore, obviously, one has to avoid that in totality. So I think that's those questions done, I think. So we can leave that for now. Let's just see what questions have come on here. Is any debt one has taken into consideration when calculating zakat, for example, student fines or a mortgage? If there has been that person whose zakat comes due and he calculates his total wealth, and let's just say he has £20,000, and now he's thinking, okay, I need to give zakat on 20,000. He may, not he has to, but he may deduct 1 year's worth of outstanding loans. Okay. When it comes to things which are mortgage or student finance or things like that, which will naturally have a interest component, a capital component, which is the original value, and also a component which is the interest, then he may only deduct the component which is the capital. He cannot deduct the interest because he's not permitted to enter into an interest generating agreement in the first place. And if he has, obviously that's sinful, and therefore he cannot then benefit from that arrangement by having it deducted from his total and reducing his zakat. However, obviously it is more preferable, especially when it comes to long-term debts like mortgages and student finance, that he doesn't deduct it, but rather he only deducts things like short-term loans. Like, for example, if say you've borrowed money from your father or your friend, and you need to pay back your father or your friend, then that makes sense to deduct that. But usually when people enter into student finance debts, mortgage debts, then these are usually 20-year, 30-year debts, so they're going to be for a long time. The best thing to do with those cases is to pay them off as soon as possible. And if you pay them off as soon as possible, you won't have any wealth. And if you don't have any wealth, then there's no zakat due. That's the best solution to have. But to agree into a long-term loan deal, which is, this is not really an Islamic practice. There was never a time when Muslims used to enter into long-term debts by choice. They would only borrow money out of absolute necessity, and then they would pay that back immediately. So even when my parents, when they first arrived here in the UK and they needed to borrow money, to buy a house and things like that, then when they borrowed the money, they would work their fingers to the bone to pay off straight away. So there would be like 5 years, 6 years, 10 years where they would never give zakat. Why? Because they never had any money. Because as soon as they had a little bit more beyond their means, they would cover that person's debt. When they had a little bit beyond their means, they would cover that person's debt. But now we've just bought into this kind of credit world that the modern world is based on, which is to live on credit. And it's absolutely fine to live on credit. So you see many people whose credit cards they're just paying the minimum amount of the credit card, and they're just paying interest every month. And it's just become normalized, being in student loan debts for decades, mortgaging, getting a mortgage on a property, then remortgaging the property, then remortgaging the property again, and just living on debt. And this is not really an Islamic practice. This is not encouraged, that live on debt. It's always be live within your means, live what capacity you have, live what rizq, what wealth Allah has given you, use that and survive on that. There is absolutely sometimes when your person needs to borrow, they're stuck for whatever reason. But that should be an emergency. That shouldn't be the default position all the time, to be in debt, to always, be wanting to borrow. So one has to be a little bit careful in those kind of scenarios. I forgot to check the theme for tomorrow, so I'll have to give you that theme tomorrow, inshallah, because as I said, this at the moment is helter-skelter, because on Wednesdays and Fridays I'm at Masjid Bilal as well. So literally whatever time it was, 4 o'clock, I left home and then got to the masjid, prayed Asr. After Asr, I had my lecture. After my lecture, I drove home, picked some food up for the family, came home. Obviously, Maghrib, broke fast, then ate, and then literally ran upstairs to set this up. So it's for the last 4 hours, I've been constantly on the move. So it's a little bit difficult at the moment because of obviously with the iftar time pushing, and then obviously this session coming early. But inshallah, we will settle sooner or later, so things will get a little bit better. How far does one need to go in determining that someone is eligible for zakah? Is mere assumption enough, or one has to inquire in depth? Mere assumption is not enough. One does have to inquire in some element of depth, but I wouldn't go like, crazy. Start checking in his bag and asking him to, whatever. There's a bit of, common decency. And you could tell when a person's in financial constraints because of how they're living, the state of their house, the type of clothes they wear, what they, and things like that. So you can tell this person is in financial difficulty if obviously you're giving it based on faqir and miskeen. But yes, one has to be sure at the end of the day that this person is eligible to receive zakat, 100%. If someone earns money through impermissible means, can they make amends by investing it in halal ventures? And if they do, is the profit generated from these lawful investments considered permissible? So if someone earns money through impermissible means, can they make amends by making it a halal venture? Not really, because the money that they've used is impermissible. So what does it mean by impermissible? Is it money that they've stolen? If it's money that they've stolen, they need to return it to the person that they stole it from. If it's money made by buying or selling something which is illegal and haram, then that money itself is haram. So it's very difficult to change something into a halal venture when the actual item is haram itself. How does one do that? To use, or is the entire process deemed impermissible? The entire process is deemed impermissible from the start. That one shouldn't be engaged in anything which is impermissible, because sooner or later, if Allah gives that person a chance to awaken and understand the gravity of it, then he's going to be in difficult circumstances to continue to pay that back. We had a chat with a brother earlier, straight after Jummah Salah, and his situation was such that he came out of the masjid, he listened to the khutbah, and in the khutbah, the Imam Sahib was talking about taqwa and about being careful and being sure about that your earnings are from halal and your earnings are not from haram, and the fact that your salah won't be accepted if your earnings are from haram. And he says, look, I've got a feeling that the coat that I'm wearing or the clothes that I'm wearing might not be 100% halal. What do I do now? No, that's okay. It was only a coat. It wasn't worth a lot of money. But if you've built your whole life on haram money, if you've built you bought your house on haram money, you're feeding your kids, your family haram money, that's your day job, has been for the last 10, 15 years. Everything you own is because of that haram money. How do you now disentangle that? How do you now clean yourself? How do you come out of that? It's a long process. It's a long process. So it does seem sweet and tasty when a person engages in it. But really, when the penny drops, it's a painful drop. So as soon as you find out, as soon as the best thing to do is just to literally cut it there and abandon that. And whatever's been gained through illicit means is to just give it away and start from scratch. If you've got 2 arms and you've got 2 legs, you can work. And if you can work, you can earn. And if you can earn slowly, step by step, yes, you're going to go through some hard times, but it's better to go through some hard times through a halal way than go through some good times through a haram way, because eventually one will get their comeuppance, and there's no way around that. So I'll just give another minute, see if there's any other questions outstanding. Alhamdulillah. Because as soon as we finish now, it's going to be jump straight onto Taraweeh as well. So it's all go, mashallah. Wa alaikum salam. The borrowed money from family and the money is still in account, but they pay zakat on the money every year, understanding you will pay them back. If you borrowed money from family and the money is still in account, but they pay zakat on the money every year, understanding you pay them back, is that okay, or do you pay? That's absolutely okay. 100% correct, Dilwa. So any money that you have borrowed from somebody else, even though you've not used it yet, it's still in your bank account, because your aim is to use it to buy something, but it's taking a little bit of time. You're trying to buy a house, say, and you're gathering a deposit money. So you've borrowed off family and friends to put a deposit down, and the zakat day comes up. You don't give zakat on it. Why? It's not your money. They give zakat on it. Why? It's their money. So that's always the best way to understand it, that who owns that money. And whoever owns that money, the Malik is the one who gives zakat. So if that person owns the money, even though it's in your possession, possession doesn't matter. Possession is irrelevant. It's the fact of who the owner of it is, because the owner of it is the one who takes benefit from it. Yes, you are taking a temporary benefit from it because you've borrowed it, but you will eventually return it and they will be theirs. So always remember that golden rule, that whoever is the owner of the money is the one giving zakat on it. What is the origin and significance of Muslim men wearing a hat? When is it considered necessary or recommended for Muslim men to wear a hat in accordance with Islamic teaching? We find, for example, the Prophet ﷺ always had his head covered. Very rarely did he have his head uncovered. So, that's a practice which existed. Similarly, we find, obviously, the Sahaba that came after that, they would also have their head covered. Now, the question comes up that was this just a normal practice of an Arab 1400 years ago, or was there some religious connotations to it as well? The way we understand it and the way that it's come across to us, that there is a religious connotations to it, but it's not absolute, like it's a stressed sunnah or something like that, that if a person becomes sinful if they don't do it. But yes, we see, for example, in the ihram, that a person will not cover his head. He will remove it from his head, and he will not wear a hat. Similarly, when a person is being buried, then they're not buried with a hat. They're buried without a hat. So you can see that there's certain times when the hat is not mentioned. However, we see in most of the time of the Prophet ﷺ or the companions, he would always have a head covering, whether it was a hat, whether it was a amama, a turban, or some sorts, he would always have his head covered. So that's the understanding we take from it. It's now kind of it's kind of like an attire which you now associate with a Muslim man. The fact that you've mentioned it there, it's it's a kind of an identity now of a Muslim man. If you see a turban tied in a certain way, then that's an identity of a Sikh. You know that this person is a Sikh just because of the headgear that they might have. Similarly, if you see the turban tied in a slightly different way, that you'll say, this person's a Muslim man. If you see a man with a hat on his head, then you'll think that this person's a Muslim. You see, for example, the Jews will have a different type of headgear. So headgear was part of the clothing, and therefore it is considered, but it wouldn't be considered to the same kind of level. What I would suggest you do, Iman, is I do have a video on this channel which talks about Islamic dress or something along that lines. So that will go into it more detail, inshallah. Yes, there is mention about that. The Prophet ﷺ used to wear one, a black one generally, but also a white one. And there's recorded hadith which mention it. So I'll give another minute, inshallah. So if there's any outstanding questions, and then we can jump ship. I got your message now, Iman, on WhatsApp. Maybe if I saw it earlier, I could have done something about it. Khair. Does making dua for someone in one's heart during salah invalidate the salah or make it disliked? When we're praying salah, we should be focusing on salah, not necessarily focusing on doing something else. if one is intended to give charity for a specific cause, would it be permissible to give it to a different cause instead of the one a person first intended? Absolutely. This is just extra shuck. A person calling Allah, saying Ya Rabbi, and accidentally looking at a picture of a person on their phone at the same time, would that be a sin? No, I think you're overcooking things now, sister. Please tell me a dua for constant worry and over worrying. Yes, I think it's not just a dua. It's good to get some kind of support and medical intervention and some kind of this is something that's an anxiety issue like OCD. So you need coaching and you need some intervention that will help you understand this problem and have it repaired, inshallah. Otherwise, it will persist and it will only get worse. Okay, I think we've reached a good point with 6 minutes or so away. So do bear with me every day. I might be, until we switch it over to 7:30, which will be on Sunday. So tomorrow again, I might be a little 10 minutes late, 15 minutes late, inshallah. But do bear with me. But then we switch to 7:30 and things will get a little bit easier, inshallah. So till tomorrow. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.